Hello, and welcome to The Little Things in Yharnam. I'm your host, Redgrave, and I hope you're all managing to stay warm out there in this freezing time. If you live, at least if you live in America, freezing time, and presumably other places. It's cold outside. I actually haven't shaved because I want to keep my face warm while it's so cold outside, and I don't want to wear a scarf because, it's for hipsters. Today, we're going to be talking about Oedon, and this will be the second episode of the little things in Yharnam with big air quotes, because obviously Oedon is not a little thing at all. Like I said in my previous video, after, the original purpose of this series was that I sort of felt I had gotten everything out that I wanted to talk about when it came to the big things, and I just wanted to go in and start looking at the little things. And then the DLC happened, and everyone who's sort of interested in interpreting the lore has really had to go into more detail on the revelations of the DLC, and I'm myself included. But after this episode on Oedon, I feel like we'll be back to business as usual with just the little things in Yharnam. Before I get started, two things. First, I want to give a huge thank to, and I'm probably going to absolutely butcher the pronunciation of her name, ChwalebnyChlor. It's Polish, I don't know. Who was nice enough to give me some cool artwork of the moon presence to use as my YouTube background, and was also super fucking awesome enough to actually draw my hunter just from watching my stream, which was just like the sickest. That is something I never expected anyone to ever do, and it's just like so cool. So thank you very much. She has a DeviantArt page that I will provide a link to in the description below. Thank you very much. Second, in regards to my previous video, The Hunter's Origin, a user named Jacob Albano pointed out to me that Alfred, in his Queen Killer form, because Alfred specifically has two different forms, I guess you would call them. There's Alfred Vileblood Hunter, where he uses the Kirk Hammer, and there's Alfred Queen Killer, where he has the Gold Ardeo on and he uses Logarius Wheel. Alfred, as Alfred Queen Killer, also uses lead elixirs in addition to Brador, which was very interesting. Thank you, Jacob, for pointing that out to me. Okay. Today, we are going to be talking about Formless Oedon, the Great One of Blood. Oedon, probably the source of the most crazy and wild speculation in lore, in Bloodborne's lore. I have read so many absolutely insane theories having to do with Oedon that I won't even get into. But funnily enough, I'm going to provide you with my own. And in fact, if you read the original Pale Blood Hunt, you'll know that I too once had a very crazy belief on Oedon. But at that point, I didn't really understand how death worked in Bloodborne. The idea that Mergo could be dead and yet still interact with us was not really an idea that I, at the time, had fully considered, and so I've since reversed my opinion on that. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about Oedon, and I thought it would be cool to start by talking about the etymology of Oedon's name. There have been two main suggestions in the past that I have read. The first came from a content creator called TerraMantis, who has a very cool video called 10 Things, I don't know exactly, it's like 10 Things You Missed About Bloodborne, 10 Things You Didn't Know About Bloodborne. It's a really cool video. Specifically, I'm a really big fan of the last thing he goes into, which is autoenucleation, the removal of one's own eyes. And he correctly establishes that another term for autoenucleation is Oedipism, named after Oedipus, who gouged his own eyes out after he was driven mad. TerraMantis then makes the connection that Oedon, I think, or Edu, which is the root word behind Oedipus, is also the root word behind Oedon, Oedon. I'm not so sure about that because Edu is the Greek word, it's an adjective for the swelling. Specifically, one might describe the swelling of a tumor. And it doesn't really fit simply because of the way that the etymology of the word works in regards to other things, which is I'm going to be going into more in a little bit. The second thing that people have suggested is that Oedon is based off of Odin, which I don't think is very... I don't think there's any reason to think that. Demon Souls and Dark Souls absolutely had a lot of Norse mythology influence in them, but there doesn't really appear to be that anywhere in Bloodborne. There really does not appear to be much of the Nordic influence that was so prevalent in Demon Souls and Dark Souls. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more later. What I think the etymology behind Oedon's name comes from is Oedon. Oedon is a reflexive verb. It's a verb that comes up a lot in the New Testament if you read it in Greek. And the literal translation of Oedon is he has seen. And by seen, it means it would be used, it's used a lot in the New Testament to refer to someone who has experienced God, someone who has seen the glory, or someone has known and experienced the glory of Christ. It's not really seen in a physical manner, it's seen more in a metaphysical manner. And you might be saying, well, okay, great. So you're probably a little bit more familiar with one of the variations on this verb in a different tense, which is eidos, which has the same root meaning. Eidos is the Greek word the Greek verb for to know, to understand, to comprehend, to believe, to see, to know. And interestingly enough, oida and eidos, they get their root from a Proto-Indo-European word called wide, which quite literally means to see, like with an eye. So eidos is the word that you're probably a little bit more familiar with, if only because we get a lot of words from this terminology. For example, the word eidolon, which, if you're not familiar with, an eidolon is sort of... Hey! 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 You fucking up my lore video? Come here. Come here. Okay. An eidolon is sort of like a phantom or a sort of ghost. It's like a human, but it's sort of like spiritual. It's some kind of phantom. And actually, Lovecraft even has an eidolon in his mythos. The ruler of Thalarion, City of a Thousand Wonders from the Dreamlands, is ruled over by a eidolon called Lothi. And it's also from this word eidos that we get a suffix, oid, because oid comes from oida, and it's the OID. So, for example, if you have a human being, if you have a human and you have a humanoid, it's something which is kind of like a human. But what eidos really refers to, and what is really talked about the most in regards to the word eidos, is a Platonic form. Eidos is okay. Now, I'm not going to get into exactly what Platonic forms are because I don't want to be here for the next 7 hours. I kind of want to go play Darkest Dungeon because that came out today. Yeah, so we're going to wrap this shit up. I'm kidding. Only half. Kidding. Eidos is form. What do I mean by form? Well, funnily enough, I don't mean like formless. Like, it's one of those weird quirks of our evolution, of the evolution of our language, where a word has sort of taken an opposite meaning. So what Plato wrote in the Republic is that everything in the world was composed of two different things: substance and form. What does that mean? So, for example, if you have a circle, just a circle. When you have a circle in nature, you can see it, but you never encounter this is what he writes in the Crotylus dialogue. You never encounter a perfect circle in nature. But we still can comprehend this sort of idea of a perfect circle. And in fact, the idea of a circle, eidos, is also directly used in the context of idea as an eidos. It can be they can be literally used interchangeably. So everything in the world, there's the matter of it, the stuff, and there's the idea of it. And Plato writes that these forms actually exist. These forms of like the perfect circle exists in some kind of metaphysical sense. He didn't use the term metaphysical because that would be Aristotle. But Plato actually writes that these forms, these perfect beings, these perfect ideas are real, but they don't exist in our world. We can't perceive them. We can't know them. We can't experience them. And Plato extrapolates this to literally everything. So chairs, there's the perfect form of a chair. And when we make a chair, we're just making a sort of reflection of our idea of a chair. And our idea comes from, for a lack of the better word, the cosmos. Just it exists in some higher plane. And in fact, this higher plane of perfect beings is where the New Testament Christian idea of heaven would come from. Okay, so I said a lot of weird shit there. but what am I actually talking about? So we learn from the Oedon runes, and I have their descriptions here, that the Great One Oedon, lacking form, exists only in voice and is symbolized by this rune. Okay, and when people say that Oedon is formless, funnily enough, what they mean is that he is a form. I know. It's just that weird quirk of our language. A form is formless. You can sort of think of it as Oedon being this perfect entity, and then there are just reflections of him. And in fact, in the Oedon Writhe rune and the Formless Oedon rune, it says, human or no, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade, and the essence of the formless Great One, Oedon. So, what am I saying by this? Well, I'm saying that the blood can sort of be seen as the circle, and then Oedon is the perfect circle. If that makes any sense at all. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but we're going to be going into it a lot. We're going to be really breaking this down and really exploring what Oedon is. Okay. So, I thought it might be cool to just sort of open the video by going over that kind of etymology and that basic idea of there being something that exists outside of our perception. Something that is literally unknowable by us, and it just exists outside of reality. Because that idea is kind of why people come up with these crazy speculations for what Oedon is or for who Oedon is. Because people are so desperate to perceive Oedon. Except Oedon, by definition, is formless and cannot be perceived. He's a form that is formless, can't be perceived, by definition, which is why people try so hard to define him. And we're going to be breaking that apart in a little bit. First, what I want to do, or second rather, is I want to talk a little bit about Bloodborne in regards to sort of cultural aspects that we kind of miss. And I think there's a very important cultural aspect of Bloodborne that the Western community doesn't really get. Now, in Demon Souls and Dark Souls, The games were very, very heavily just straight based off of very Western sword and sorcery, Judeo-Christian values, and Norse mythology. I was talking to an acquaintance of mine from the Japanese Souls community. And for those of you who don't know, lore hunting in Japan is very, very not, like, relatively small. It's not that big a thing compared to the West. And I was talking to this acquaintance of mine, and he said that with Bloodborne there had sort of been a resurgence. It had seen a little more popularity, the idea of taking apart this lore. And the reason for that is that while Dark Souls and Demon Souls had these very Western influences, Bloodborne seemed to take a lot from Japanese cultural issues, and they had seen a lot of reflection in Japanese culture and in Buddhism. There's a lot of Buddhist imagery in Bloodborne, and Shinto imagery in Bloodborne, which I've talked about a little bit in regards to the Bon Festival, Hozuki, bells, and which a few other people have noted in that a lot of the monsters are sort of influenced by a mix between Lovecraft and by Buddhist creatures or Japanese spirits. JSF in particular talks a lot about that in his videos. And so this friend of mine I was talking to said that because of these, in addition to that, there were a lot of people in the Japanese community who saw a lot of Yharnam as sort of being relevant to Japanese current culture. He specifically mentioned the rampant xenophobia of the Yharnamites, which he said he sort of saw as a sort of commentary on the rampant xenophobia in Japan. And there's a lot of cultural stuff in Bloodborne that we don't really get, because while it's in a Western setting, it has a lot of Eastern components to it. Now, that being said, I would like to tell you a story now. This is a true story. This is not a folk tale that I'm going to tell you. It's the story of a town in Japan called Minamata. If you have heard of Minamata and you know what I'm talking about, then just don't spoil it for anyone else, because we're going to go over it. Just for the purposes of this video, I will be referencing a work by Douglas Allchin, a professor at the University of Minnesota, who summarized it a little bit. So I'll be quoting from that in a couple places, and I'll let you know when I'm quoting that, and there will be a link below for people who are more interested. So our story of Minamata begins in the early 1950s. In this village, which was a very poor fishing village, the villagers started to notice that the cats of Minamata started acting very strange. Many of the cats began to screech in the night and howl and seize. They would run in circles, they would writhe on the ground, and some of them even committed suicide. They would either jump into the ocean and drown themselves, or even in some cases jump into fires or jump into boiling pots and kill themselves. And this was seen as very, very frightening by many of the villagers of Minamata. It became known as Niko Odoribyo, the dancing cat disease, because the cats would writhe on the ground and they would seize and run in circles, and they appeared from a distance. You would think they were dancing, when in reality they were having very violent seizures. And this went very unexplained. People were very confused by this. And then in 1956, these same symptoms began to appear in children. There were a few cases of, I think there was one case of a 5-year-old girl who began sort of writhing on the ground, screeching, and clawing at herself. And before long, Minamata disease, as it became known, was starting to spread throughout the human population. And people were not sure of what was going on. It was a very frightening time for Minamata. And I have a quote here from Douglas Allchin's paper on Minamata from the University of Minnesota. One resident, Suginori Hamamoto, described the plight of his father, a fisherman. Virtually overnight, Sohachi lost his ability to keep his balance, or to stay afloat in the water once he had fallen off the boat. He could not put on his sandals, walk properly, or understand what others were saying to him. Once hardy and strongly self-willed, his condition quickly degenerated, and he was hospitalized on the 4th day. There, even tied to his bed with bandages, he crazed danced, said words that were not words. He salivated, he convulsed. Later, he tore at his own skin with his fingernails until his body bled. Quote, "Mother would look at Dad," end quote, Suginori recalled. Quote, "and just stand there, tears dropping from her eyes, looking dazed. Then we realized that the same symptoms were developing in Mother," end quote. The father died within 7 weeks. The mother, 9 years later. Minamata disease spread throughout the population, and the cause was unknown. Overall, thousands of people died. They would seize, go crazy, claw at themselves, and then inevitably get an incredibly high fever and die. The disease was pretty rapidly spread. As soon as it started popping up everywhere. And the villagers of Minamata were very naturally concerned by this. And here's another quote from Douglas Allchin's paper. Because the disease was related to the unexplainable behavior of wildly acting cats, the disease became stigmatized, often in the victim's own eyes. In the Japanese view of medicine, the condition of the body reflects how the individual has maintained his or her balance with the external world, and sickness can be viewed as something deserved. The victims were thus often implicitly blamed for their own condition. Also, wary of contagion, residents ostracized diseased patients. Neighbor turned against neighbor. One tatami mat maker, Yahei Ikeda, for instance, disparaged those who had the disease, until one day he too, ironically, showed the symptoms. Neighbors with whom he had earlier shared his isolationist sentiments regarding the victims now turned those same feelings against him. So, now you're probably asking me, well, what is this disease? What happened? What caused this disease? Well, there's something I sort of neglected to inform you, which is that shortly after World War II, the chemical company named Chiso relocated all of its assets to Minamata in the wake of the devastation to sort of regroup everything. And they started dumping mercury into the water. And they were dumping mercury in the water of this fishing village for about 30 years. Without telling anyone, of course. But the thing about this town, Minamata, is that it was so centered around this chemical company that it was pretty much entirely reliant and dependent upon this chemical company for survival. It was a very, very poor village. And all of the economic success of this village relied upon Chiso. And in fact, it's something like 60% of the villagers were either employed by Chiso or had a relative who was employed by Chiso. In fact, the mayor was an ex-director of Chiso. Many members of the student board were also employees of Chiso. So, in 1959, when it became revealed that when a investigative panel, a research panel, discovered and narrowed the source of Minamata disease to mercury poisoning, and the only people around who had mercury were Chiso, naturally, it was a very tense time. On one hand, everybody sort of realized that it was this Chiso company that was responsible for this, and that clearly they were doing something wrong, and there was a lot of anger about that. But at the same time, this company was their protector. It was their it was their everything. The members of the city board. You would be turning against your brother possibly if you claimed that Chiso was responsible for this. And it really wouldn't be for another 40 or 50 years that Chiso and the Japanese government really sort of confessed and acknowledged that this had happened. And in that time, there were around 50,000 people with severe symptoms. Around 5,000 died, and an entire population was traumatized. Now, if you're sensing any parallels here to Bloodborne, you're certainly not crazy. But you might be saying that well, this kind of story is certainly not unique to Japan and unique to Bloodborne. And you're right, except for the fact that Bloodborne revolves around Mercury. It's an incredibly important part of the world of Bloodborne. And it's something we don't really think about a lot in the West, but in Japan, which is the most densely populated island nation in the world, the threat of mercury poisoning is very real. It's a very conscious thing that people are aware of, that you can't eat certain fish more than once or twice a month. What happens is, well, I'll go into that in a little bit, but mercury is very prevalent in Bloodborne. In fact, there's mercury in everyone's blood in Bloodborne. That's what quicksilver bullets are. And in fact, in the Japanese version of the game, it cuts out the middleman and just calls them mercury bullets. Quicksilver is just another name for mercury. Mercury, this element, mercury, it was very important in alchemy, which, aside from being the subject of kids' books and animes and Da Vinci Code novels and that sort of thing, was a real scientific pursuit that a lot of people participated in, both East and West. Everybody was pretty big on alchemy. And in fact, in Bloodborne, in The Hunter's Dream, if you zoom in on some of Gehrman's books, you can see that he has quite a few textbooks and encyclopedias on alchemy. Like some of the things, they just say like Alchemy Volume 5. Mercury, quicksilver. So the most famous thing about mercury is that it's formless. What do I mean by that? Well, mercury is pretty much solid, liquid, and gas all at the same time. It's really weird. At room temperature, it's liquid, but it can also be put into a solid form. And while it is a solid or liquid form, it is also constantly putting off vapor. So in that sense, mercury is sort of known as being formless. And mercury is incredibly important in Bloodborne. Incredibly important in Bloodborne. Mercury is basically the power source in Bloodborne. It's our energy source. What do I mean by that? Well, aside from the obvious fact that we use mercury to sort of create bullets, and that that in Bloodborne, mercury is pretty much loaded into guns and used to fire guns, mercury is also used as a power source for all of these rituals that we're performing. For example, just using a call beyond. You're not stuffing the phantasm full of bullets. It's the mercury that matters. You're using this mercury as sort of an energy source to open a portal to the arcane world. And you know who drops quicksilver bullets every single time without fail? The only enemy in the game that always drops quicksilver bullets are the Bellringers, ritual masters of Thumaru. They were using mercury in order to, whatever ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, fuck you, Nightmare Apostle, Demon Spider ritual they're doing requires mercury. The choir is using mercury. The choir bell requires mercury. Their artifacts require mercury. Bergenworth was using mercury. The Black Sky Eye required mercury. The hunters are using mercury. They use it to power their bullets. Mercury is vital in Bloodborne. In Yharnam, everyone uses mercury. And what that means is everyone's got a little bit of mercury poison in them. And in some people, probably more than other. Everybody's got some mercury in you. And in a pinch, in a disaster, we as hunters can pull out, take out some of our blood, and that's like sort of our emergency usage, our emergency power source, which can only mean there's a lot of mercury in there, in our blood, if we can use our blood to power these artifacts. And this brings us to the relationship between Oedon and Mercury, which is that obviously Oedon's runes, Formless Oedon and Oedon Writhe, are both affect our ability to hold Quicksilver. Formless Oedon determines how much Quicksilver bullets we can hold, and Oedon Writhe actually allows us to extract Mercury from blood, which is really, really something incredible. If I just read right here the description of the Oedon Writhe rune. Writhe sees a subtle mucus in the warmth of blood and acknowledges visceral attacks as one of the darker hunter techniques. Visceral attacks restore Quicksilver bullets. Human or no, the oozing blood is a medium of the highest grade, and the essence of the formless Great One Oedon. Both Oedon and Oedon's inadvertent worshippers surreptitiously seek the precious blood. And speaking of Oedon Writhe, I was very confused by this symbol for a while. I couldn't really... I was like, what? It's so cluttered when most of the symbols in Bloodborne are very straightforward. And then I sort of realized that Oedon Writhe is two symbols overlapping each other. The first symbol is, well, a vagina, blatantly put. It's the ichthys, which is a sort of double-pointed oval with a tail, and it happens to have an extra tail, just for symmetry, so that it looks cooler. And the second symbol is the astronomical symbol for Mercury. Yeah, it's actually not symmetrical because the bottom crescent sort of is very broad, whereas the top crescent is very narrow, which lines up perfectly with Mercury, which the astronomical symbol for Mercury. So what we're doing is these are two symbols very relevant to Oedon, childbirth and Mercury, and even maybe gathering Mercury from within blood, and certainly wouldn't be the first person to suggest that some of the blood in Bloodborne is menstrual blood. So that's, it's really interesting that Oedon appears to be a god of Mercury. A sort of, this Mercury is the essence of the formless Oedon, this formless Mercury, which we can turn into any shape, any kind of bullet for whatever gun we want to use, or we can turn into whatever kind of power source we need for our ritual materials. This sort of formless Mercury is the essence of the formless Great One Oedon. And Mercury, by the way, just sort of as a little aside, it is also referred to in alchemy as Azoth, which, if you know a little bit about Lovecraft, you might know about Azathoth, which is an important outer god in Lovecraft. And in the past, there have been some comparisons between Oedon and Azathoth, in that they're sort of omnipresent gods that sort of speak only through weird, like they're Azathoth is described as the blind idiot god, meaning that while he's all powerful, he doesn't really interfere with anything. He just sort of exists as he's just sort of this entity that exists and sort of influences the world, but not through any intent. And Azathoth is, as Lovecraft scholars discuss, derived from Azazel and Azoth. Azoth is another word for Mercury, used in alchemy. And Azoth comes from the Hebrew words Ein Sof. I don't know if that's actually how you pronounce it in Hebrew, Ein Sof. It comes up in Kabbalah, which is a collection of Hebrew teachings. And Ein Sof refers to what God was before manifesting itself as an entity. And let me just quote, I have a quote right here from the Zohar of the Kabbalah. Before he gave any shape to the world, before he produced any form, he was alone, without form, and without resemblance to anything else. So there we have it. Oedon appears to be this form of this Mercury and this corrupted blood. And so if we think of, this Mercury and this oozing blood as being the essence of Oedon, we can think of it as being the imperfect circle, whereas Oedon is the sort of cosmic perfect circle, the sort of the ultimate idea of this blood. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Mercury. We've talked a little bit about Oedon. But why? But what is Oedon like? Why is what's going on here? And how is Oedon related to things? Well, everyone seems to be using Oedon's blood, for lack of a better term, in their rituals, in their seeking it. And let's go over sort of how mercury poisoning works. It works through a process called biomagnification. And I should have a chart somewhere around here. I don't know where it will be yet. But it starts with basically mercury is introduced into the environment. How it starts is like little plants or tiny fish begin by absorbing and eating the mercury in the water. And so these little fish, they have a little bit of mercury in these systems. But then the bigger fish, who eat these little fish, yum, 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 they have a little bit more mercury in their system. And it concentrates and it grows exponentially because they're eating things that have been eating mercury. And then the even bigger fish, who eat the bigger fish, they have a ton of mercury inside of them because they've been eating things that have been eating things that have been eating things. And the further up the food chain you go, the more mercury, the more concentrated mercury you have in you. And mercury, this disease, this poison, this pollution, is something that is very, very important to people of Japan. And speaking of pollution, if we look at the impurity rune, for example, the Japanese word used for the impurity rune is stagnation, which, so impurity is a pretty accurate translation because the stagnation is specifically referring to like polluted water or stagnant polluted water. And what you get from stagnant polluted water, you get things like maggots, flies, and centipedes. And centipedes are very much a symbol of corruption in Japanese culture. And, that brings us to the vermin, and it brings us to corruption and corrupted blood. So taking a look back at our chart real quick, I went ahead and, well, I haven't done it yet, but I will before. Okay, we're going to say I did it beforehand just to make it look like I'm super prepared. So we're just going to pretend that I've already done this. I went ahead and I made some changes to the chart, which is somewhere around here. And we can see that something very similar to biomagnification of mercury poisoning is happening in Bloodborne. You start with Oedon, and the essence of Oedon is this sort of corrupted, poisonous blood that has a power inside of it. It's got some kind of power inside of this blood. And at first, the little creatures start absorbing it. And you get, things like phantasms, maybe. Or, just hunter, or not. You get things like phantasms. And then, what starts using these phantasms? Well, you get, people start using these phantasms. And they start absorbing this corruption, really, into them, this poison. They start absorbing this poison into them by using these phantasms or by using other methods of dangerous material, and it starts affecting them, corrupting them. And then from there, you get things like kin of the cosmos and beasts who start, killing and absorbing those people, because that's what's going on. When we kill something, we get blood echoes. We get, the essence of their blood is drawn into us. And if some of those blood echoes are corrupted, we're drawing some of those corrupted blood echoes into us. And then, we get things like vile bloods and hunters and clerics who slaughtering en masse, and these are powerful figures who have absorbed blood echoes and have absorbed this corruption, and these are very strong figures. And then we get things like Queen Yharnam and Queen Annalise, who have taken these vile bloods and these hunters and these clerics and these powerful Pthumerians and have sort of absorbed them. And that's what Queen Annalise is doing. She's taking blood dregs, which are the blood of powerful hunters and powerful beings, and she's absorbing them into herself with the goal of becoming able to conceive. So we've got this whole, and we can imagine something very similar happened to Queen Yharnam. And Ariana, too, the Court of the Eye that we get from Ariana's celestial child says that every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate, and Oedon, the formless great one, is no different. To think it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. So what appears to happen is, if you have enough of this concentrated corruption inside of you, just this vile impurity inside of you, then you sort of can commune with Oedon. And when Oedon, I guess Oedon's kind of a horny guy, because when he communes with you, he impregnates you. Ariana is kind of a special case. If you know anything about my theories, I theorize that Ariana is the child of Annalise, and that for whatever reason, Ariana is no longer fled Canehurst or was abandoned or ran away or whatever. And, because there's the painting, and there's the noble dress, which you find right in front of the painting. And, that would sort of explain it, because mercury poisoning is absolutely passed on to children of pregnant mothers. Absolutely passed on. In Japan, pregnant women aren't allowed to eat fish because the fish is so contaminated that it's dangerous. So, you could think of Ariana as sort of being wrong place, wrong time, or wrong mother, wrong time. And when we look at Oedon as just sort of this corruption, like this corrupt blood, is really what caused everything to go wrong. The Pthumerians were clearly, they had the scourge of the beast went crazy, and the Pthumerians sort of Queen Yharnam was impregnated. Marigo was born in stillbirth, which is what the Yharnam stone is, and just the civilization crumbled. And you look at the vile bloods too. They were kidnapping people and offering their blood dregs to the queen. And ironically enough, the Healing Church was pretty much doing the same thing. Everyone has been using Oedon's corrupt, poisonous blood and absorbing it into themselves in order to grow more powerful. And in fact, you can use blood dregs. And what do you get when you use a blood dreg? You get a point of insight. Like, this blood, this corrupt, poisonous blood of Oedon is actually very powerful, and it really does change you and affect you in many, many different ways. And as the Oedon runes inform us, both Oedon and Oedon's inadvertent worshippers surreptitiously seek the precious blood. Think of the hypocrisy of Alfred, where he says that the forbidden corrupt blood of the vile bloods poses a threat to the pure holy blood of the Healing Church, when in reality they're both pretty much using the same thing, only in kind of different forms of it. And what do you get? Well, you can become kin of the cosmos, which is essentially a monster. Kin of the cosmos. Oedon is the cosmos. Oedon is this formless, omnipresent, existing being that sort of exists everything. He's the closest thing you can get to an omnipresent Judeo-Christian god in the story of Bloodborne. And when you have kin of the cosmos, these are sort of kin of Oedon. Now, I need to pause for a moment to really take a moment to address the distinction between Great One and kin, because this is something that a lot of people get mixed up on and disagree with me about. So the game itself is very inconsistent when it talks about kin of the cosmos as whether or not they are or are not Great Ones. For example, the kin Coldblood specifically states that the kin are brethren of the Great Ones, and, not Great Ones themselves. Whereas the, Augur of Ebritus, the Ice Chalice, refers to Ebritas as the left behind Great One. So when you think of whether or not the kin are Great Ones doesn't really matter. What matters is that we acknowledge that there's a difference in just power level, for lack of a better term, between the kin and things like Oedon and the Moon Presence and Kos, these incredibly powerful gods that have the ability to just change the world around them, to just manipulate everything. We have to acknowledge that there's a difference. Whether or not you want to call Ebritas a Great One, whatever. Just acknowledge that she's kin of the cosmos, and if you want to call kin of the cosmos Great Ones, be my guest. Just acknowledge that there's a difference. And in fact, what Ariana gives birth to is a celestial child, which might explain where Ebritas came from. Ebritas was found in the Chalice Dungeons. The Chalice Dungeons are the remnants of the Pthumerian catacombs, so maybe a surrogate child of Oedon grew up to be Ebritas, kind of like what might have happened if we hadn't killed Ariana's celestial child. And seeing as Ebritas seems to be the source of the church's special blood, and the phantasms, which are the sort of Ebritas's familiars, everyone's using Oedon's blood. Everyone is using Oedon's blood, and they're killing each other because they disagree over it. It's kind of funny in a way. And then you get things like the vermin. This is something that I've talked to about JSF a few times, and so this is sort of the analogy that he used, which is that in the Exorcist, when you have the girl who's been possessed and she's vomiting green puke everywhere, you don't look at her and you go, well, clearly the problem is she's got a lot of green puke in her and we need to get that stuff out so she can be okay. No. The green puke is a symptom of something way worse that's going on here. And you can sort of see the vermin as the green puke, for lack of a better term. Which is that the vermin, the centipedes, which are a symbol of impurity and corruption and poison in Japanese culture, are sort of coming about and arising from the stagnant and poisonous blood of Oedon, which is filling people, making them impure, and that's what Walter is so pissed off about, is the fact that people are impure. Although, ironically, he's completely insane. And, he, ironically, of all the Confederates, he's the most impure. So, that's Oedon. Oedon is this formless being, and the essence of Oedon, this poisonous blood, is sort of the cause of everything that's going on. All the problems in Bloodborne can be traced back to Oedon. And so, like I said, Oedon has sort of been compared to Azathoth, and you might be wondering where the Moon Presence fits into all of this. Well, just from pure thematic influence, and this is not, I'm not saying this is a nail in the coffin for any theory one way or the other, but just as Oedon seems to be a little bit inspired by Azathoth. Oh, and as an aside real quick, I mentioned how another word for Mercury is Azoth, or is, Azoth, from Ein Sof in alchemy. The symbol used to represent Azoth is a Tacitus, which is a staff. It's a staff that's often referenced in terms of medicine, and in fact, Azoth and Mercury in alchemy was thought of as a special solution that could cure any disease. That was the point of Azoth, was trying to find something that could cure any disease. Sound familiar? Anyway, the symbol used to reference Azoth was a Decitus, and it's a really big stretch, but you could kind of say that the formless Oedon rune kind of looks like a Decitus. It's, like I said, it's a stretch, but it's something to think about. But Azoth, and like I said, Oedon appears to at least have some kind of inspiration from Azathoth. Similarly, the moon presence seems to have some influence or some inspiration, both visually and thematically, from Nyarlathotep, which is probably the most important. I'm going to get flack from Lovecraft fans out there for saying this, because this is purely opinion-based. But Nyarlathotep is kind of seen as the most important figure in Lovecraft's writing, not the Cthulhu mythos that came after him, but in Lovecraft's writing. And Nyarlathotep was the only great one, or not great one, the only outer god who actually used humans, who actually paid attention to humans and sort of used them for his own goals. And Nyarlathotep was the son of Azathoth, and he sort of acted as Azathoth's messenger in some ways. And he also kind of fucked over Azathoth a few times. He was kind of mischievous in his own eldritch way. And so the relationship between Oedon and Moon Presence may be kind of similar to the relationship between Azathoth and Nyarlathotep, in that it's sort of like one, like they might be similar, but at the other hand, one is trying to subvert the other. And in fact, in the Pale Blood Hunt, I wrote that the Moon Presence's goal was the murder of Oedon's children, and the children of infant Great Ones, or rather, the infant children of Great Ones. And I think that's still very valid. And you know, when you think of it that way, it's kind of like all the events in human history, according to Bloodborne, have been kind of a tug of war between Oedon and the Moon Presence. Whereas, you know, people start fucking around with Oedon's blood, and it gets really crazy, and then sort of in response, the Moon Presence acts as kind of like an antibody almost. Weirdly enough, if we think of Oedon as the poison, then weirdly enough, the Moon Presence is kind of like the antibody that creates the hunters, the pale blood hunters, to stop whatever's going on. It's kind of strange when you think about that, when you think of the big bad of Bloodborne, the Moon Presence, as sort of being like the antibody in counter to what's going on with Oedon. Very interesting. Let's see, did I have anything else I wanted to talk about? I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in terms of formless Oedon. Oh, I guess I could talk about the pronunciation of Oedon. I don't fucking know, so don't write in the comments what you think the pronunciation should be, because I don't really care. I think that's about it. Yeah. Whew. Let's see. Anything I want to go over before I close it? Well, thank you very much for watching, and for those of you who have been watching a lot of my videos, you might know that I had some problems with my apartment where I had to rewire everything. And after 3 months, finally, I am ready to move my computer out of my parents' house, this place, and into my apartment. What that means is that this will be the last episode of Little Things in Yharnam that takes place in this room, and that also means that this will be the last episode of Little Things in Yharnam that features Calvin, my cat. Calvin is 17 years old, which, if you're not familiar with cats, is fucking... Hey! Be good. Is fucking ancient as far as cats go. So he's going to be staying here. And, you know, because he's got maybe a year or two left in him. So, Calvin, say goodbye to everyone. Goodbye. Goodbye. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like me to go over anything in particular, and the little things, because that's what we're going back to. We're going back to the little things now. If you've got anything you'd like me to go over, feel free to let me know in the comments. Feel free to send me messages. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask, or anything you'd like my opinion on. And thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it.